One of the important aspects of managing the workforce is managing relationships between employees. And a very sensitive or a very troublesome relationship that we need to manage with the employees working in an organization is what we title as the office romance. So today we are going to spend a little time discussing office romance. Now, at the base, we need to understand that human beings are social in nature. Human beings are obviously supposed to interact with each other. And I'm sure that as an organization, you would be trying to build in a lot of systems, processes. In fact, even the term employee engagement was coined to start building interactions within the organization's employees. And one of the main factors or one of the main reasons that is being now put forward to ask employees to come back from the work from home model to work from office model is to say that there's going to be interaction with their employees and that will increase productivity. So wherever you have a lot of interaction with their employees, it is but natural that you're going to have feelings and emotions, and that is going to result into perceived romance, and that is going to result into actual romance. So as an organization leader or as a person who's responsible for managing the organization, how do you handle office romance? Office romance handling has to be looked at it from multiple standpoints. One standpoint is a legal standpoint, the other is a moral or an ethical standpoint, and the third is a professional standpoint. Now, let's first talk about a legal standpoint. There is no legal standpoint which says that having a romance is illegal. Yes, when you get married to more than one spouse, there are laws relating to that. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about romance. So there is no specific law. Majority of the countries like India, I mean, even India would have a lot of freedom in terms of how adults deal with each other, and there are no restricting laws. Unless you're part of a governmental organization which will have in their service rules that you cannot do office romance or those kind of things, then it may be an illegal activity from a standpoint of that organization, may not be from a standpoint of the law per se. But we are going to focus a lot on the private sector. We're not going to focus on the governmental bodies or bodies which are non-private. So if law is not governing anything, before we decide whether you should put this into the HR policies of your organization or not, let's then talk about ethically and morally. Now, ethically and morally, this is right or wrong can vary depending on which group you belong to, which age group you belong to, and which gender you belong to, and what kind of a socio-economic background you come from. So we would not get into trying to justify whether this is a right thing or office romance is a wrong thing, or whether this will be stopped or this should be encouraged, this should not be stopped, this should be ignored. None of those is something we want to get into. What we want to talk about is how do we deal with office romance in a professional manner. Okay. So professionally, what is the key expectation that employees have? Professionally, the key expectation that employees have that I should be respected as an individual, I should be treated fairly. So if I should be treated as if I should be respected as an individual, then an organization getting into my personal space in terms of how I am behaving with another colleague, whether that is flirtish behavior, whether that is romance, whether that is a platonic relationship, or whether that is just a colleague professional interaction, is not any of the things that an organization would try and classify. Okay, it's not something which an employee needs to justify that this person is like my brother, like my sister, or he's like my friend, my best friend. It's none of those things which people expect to be required to give justification to, specifically as an adult who's performing in an organization. Professionally, the employee also expects that we should be treated fairly. Fair treatment stems from a very simple aspect that there should be equality in terms of treatment. There should be no bias. That is where, as an organization, we come into, figuring out whether a relationship, whether it's a hugely friendly relationship or whether we want to classify it as a romance, whether that relationship is being treated or is causing an actual bias, by the manager or by that group, or it is a perceived bias. How a person or how two people involved who are interacting with the others, is that resulting into a bias or a treatment of others in an unfair manner? This specific thing is very much within the domain of an organization, and office romances need to be dealt with by trying to look at this. Therefore, organizations are encouraged to have rules which say that in the same pyramid, you should not have office romance, or you should not get married. Okay, people should not work in a similar concept. Why? Because if a supervisor and a junior are working in the same pyramid, then it is assumed, even if it's not an actual bias, but it is going to be a perceived bias, where it is going to be assumed that the person is unfairly giving benefit to the person who the person is having a inclination towards it by way of a romance. Now, romance also could get into a different tangent, which is a little bit outside of the professional decorum. What does that mean? That means that people could start doing things which are non-acceptable in the social environment. So what is not acceptable in a social environment? Physical intimacy, that is a private affair, that is assumed to be private, and socially it is a generally acceptable norm within India that physical intimacy of any kind is going to be assumed to be a private affair. So if office romances start having instances of physical intimacy being visible in a public environment, what is a public environment? Office spaces are public. None of the corner spots of office are supposed to be private. An office is generally, is a building or is a place where it is accessible to everyone. Therefore, rules, HR policies can be defined which state that you cannot do X, Y, Z kind of a physical intimacy kind of work within the office. And if you're caught doing those, there is going to be a punishment. So one part being that we are saying that physical intimacy is going to be controlled. We do not expect people to publicly demonstrate that or show that. Similarly, we are saying we do not want bias to be seen or perceived by other members. And obviously the third thing being that the office romance should not result into anything which is illegal. Right? What is anything which is illegal? Illegal being, getting married, even though you have your own spouses, which is an illegal activity. So how does the organization get involved into this? The organization gets involved into this by if the person has married, okay, and if the organization is aware, then it's the organization's responsibility to report it either to the spouse or to the authorities. It may not be an optional to report to the authorities, because that is going to be sometimes seen as crossing the line of getting into a person's private space, even though it's an illegal activity. But as a good citizen or as organization which is aware or which is wanting to keep decorum within the society, it is perfectly fine to report the illegal activity to the spouse. Okay? Hiding it could be seen as an accomplice. Because if you're aware, and reporting to the spouse in a legal and a formal manner would be most appropriate, so that the organization doesn't have any liability. So in a way, if you're trying to understand, what we're trying to say is that office romance is an individual's own choice. The organization needs to build in certain guardrails, and those guardrails are supposed to be built within the professional boundaries to ensure that the other employees do not feel negatively impacted, that the other employees do not feel biased or being partialed against, and that this doesn't yield into any event which is uncomfortable for everybody within the organization. So that is the kind of a system that a boundary would be set by the office romance system or office romance curtailment system. Normally, we don't have a HR policy saying how to deal with office romance. No, we don't have that kind of a policy. But you would have journal terms and conditions of behavior. You would have the code of conduct. There would be paragraphs talking about these aspects within those policies. You don't have specifically a office relationship management or office romance dealing policy. We could have a standard operating procedure within the organization to deal with. Another aspect of office romance is a result which sometimes is not sometimes, which is quite a lot of times seen to be used for making unnecessary expenditure of the company. Normally, it happens when you would have people within the same team or people at leadership positions getting involved in office romance. They then use the company resources to take more and more opportunities to have a better understanding or a better building up of this romance. So they would plan office trips together. They would plan office meetings together so that they get that additional time at the cost of the organization, using the resources of the organization to further their personal gains, which again is not specifically prohibited. What is prohibited in any case for any person is by way of a code of conduct or a travel policy or a terms and conditions of work, is that whatever activity they are doing has to be done for the benefit of the organization. They cannot do it for their personal benefit. So personal benefit, if a person is creating a business trip for engaging in a intimate relationship with a person who's they are having a romance with, then it is a individual benefit. Therefore, you should have guardrail policies which put this also as a misconduct. In any case, one factor that people should be aware of is that when a person is traveling on a business trip, it is no longer considered a private affair of the person. It is an official affair of the person. How the person conducts themselves, it is going to be the organization's prerogative to check that. Which means a person cannot say that in the hotel room, if in my free time, if I'm involved with a person, even though from an office romance, that is a private affair. No, that is not a private affair. That is very much an official affair because you're on a business trip. Okay. Whereas a person in the same location where the office is and at his home is meeting a person from the office involved in an office romance, that is a private affair. The organization can do nothing about it, and the organization actually should not do anything about it also. After all, a lot of people use the office environment for furthering their life goals, and life goal is furthered not only by earning money, it is also earned by finding a life partner and having a happily married life after that. So there is no problem in having a healthy office romance relationship, because a human being requires a relationship. Human being eventually needs to get associated with a spouse. Okay. But it is important to ensure that there are certain guardrails that are there, and any organization, as long as it can maintain the professional decorum, should not be bothered about entering into the ethical or the moral obligations or the moral ways in which people should behave, and neither should it try to justify by creating policies which do not actually corroborate to the laws of the land. If something is what the country does not prohibit it, we should not try and build policies which are prohibiting those and the country is free. Those kind of HR policies would also not go down well, and eventually will form pretty awkward situations for the organization.